At night, a mechanic pulled a car out of the garage, carefully noting the model and the new parts added. Once the work was complete, Frank, the driver, arrived to inspect the vehicle thoroughly. He walked around the car, opened the trunk, then settled into the driver's seat. As he began driving, Frank examined every detail, then suddenly accelerated to test the speed and handling through a sharp turn. Satisfied with the performance, he headed toward the pickup point. Frank was no ordinary driver. He specialized in dangerous jobs for criminals. On his way, he tried calling his boss, Klay, but received no answer. Shortly after, his daughter Katie called. She said she planned to go to a party with friends until midnight. When Frank learned that one of the friends was named Ryan, he immediately forbade her from going, reminding her she was underage and should stay home. Katie ignored his warning and hung up. He could handle a mob, a job, and a loaded trunk, but not his teenage daughter. This is the wheelman. Upon arriving at the designated spot, Frank picked up 2 passengers and drove off. One was Matt, a man sporting a mohawk, who tried to strike up a conversation. Frank remained silent, but Matt continued talking about the car and the bag beside Frank. Patiently, Frank ignored him. As they neared their destination, Matt and his partner Oakley prepared their weapons. Their target was a bank, but Frank stopped the car a short distance away. Frustrated, Matt and Oakley angrily exited the vehicle, with Matt even slamming the car window. Soon after, Frank received a call from Ben, the man who hired Klay. Ben revealed that Matt and Oakley worked for him. When Frank asked about the true objective, Ben deflected the question and instead brought up Frank's past, mentioning his time in prison over a warehouse fire. Then Ben shocked Frank by ordering him to abandon Matt and Oakley after they loaded the stolen money into the trunk. Frank refused, but Ben warned that the 2 robbers had been instructed to kill him. Although doubtful at first, Frank decided it was safest to escape once the money was loaded. As Frank pulled away, he noticed Matt and Oakley had left their rifles in the car. He then received a message from Klay and informed him that the mission was falling apart. He tried calling Klay again but still got no answer. Ben called once more but refused to share the mission's final destination. Instead, he mocked Frank for leaving the robbers behind. Frank demanded to speak directly to Klay, but Ben insisted he must obey orders. He told Frank to count the stolen money and threatened harm if he disobeyed. Reluctantly, Frank found a quiet spot to park, grabbed one of Matt's rifles, and began counting the cash. Returning to the car, he reported the amount to Ben. Since the count was incomplete, Ben ordered him out again to recount everything. In the distance, police sirens wailed. Frank counted the money once more. Unnoticed, a motorcyclist briefly stopped behind him before riding off. After finishing, Frank told Ben the total was about $230,000. Ben instructed him to keep driving and wait for further orders, forbidding calls from unknown numbers. While on the road, Frank received a call from an unknown person. He hung up immediately, but shortly after, a threatening message arrived warning that both Frank and Klay were marked for death. Shortly after, Ben called again with a drop-off location. He noticed Frank had gone too far, even though no one was supposed to be following him. When an unknown caller tried reaching Frank, he quickly turned off his phone. Ben then ordered Frank to head to Chandler Station and warned him not to answer any other calls. Soon, Katie called to say she was home and wouldn't be going to the party after all. Frank felt relieved and told her to just watch a movie at home. However, Katie said she was going to her mother's house, Frank's ex-wife, Jessica. Anger flared in Frank because tomorrow was supposed to be his time with Katie. Then, he suddenly heard Ryan's voice on the phone. Frank shouted for Katie to hand the phone to Ryan, but she hung up immediately. He called back, but couldn't get through. Frustrated, he sent a message asking Katie to call him as soon as possible. During the drive, Frank spotted a police car turning onto the road behind him. Tension rose as the siren blared. Frank prepared to flee, but the police car sped past and took another route. When things settled, Klay called to ask for Frank's location. Frank repeated that the mission was falling apart and pressed Klay for the final delivery point. Klay claimed he didn't know the destination and said Ben would inform Frank later. He expressed confusion over why Ben told Frank to abandon the 2 robbers and escape with the money. Growing frustrated, Frank demanded that Klay contact Ben immediately. Klay insisted he knew nothing about what had happened. He only knew that Ben came from Jeff Avenue and didn't know who Ben or the unknown caller really were. Klay also mentioned that the unknown caller had sent death threats to both himself and Frank. Hearing this, Frank felt betrayed by Klay, especially since he had just been released from prison and was desperate not to return. Klay promised to fix things, but Frank still had to deliver the money to the place Ben specified. Still upset, Frank received another call from Katie. He asked to speak with Ryan directly. Instead of getting angry, Frank spoke calmly, explaining that their family had been struggling since his release from prison. He asked Ryan to be a good friend and come home by 9. Ryan agreed, and Frank reassured Katie that everything was safe. Near Chandler Station, Ben contacted Frank again with directions to a delivery point. Ben said it wasn't the final destination, but rather a place to exchange goods. Frank protested, saying his job was only to deliver. Ben hung up abruptly. At the location, Frank saw several people approaching his car. Sensing danger, he turned around and left immediately. Klay called back and finally revealed that the mission was actually a drug deal. Frank refused, insisting his job was only to deliver. Klay offered to take over the deal at Chandler Station, but Frank didn't trust him and refused to hand over the money. Klay also refused to reveal who Ben really was. Frank insisted that Ben was tied to another group called West End, a mafia faction. Losing patience, Klay threatened to report Frank to Ben for stealing the money if he didn't complete the deal. Not long after, Frank drove into a tunnel and noticed a motorcyclist tailing him closely. Klay called again, pressuring Frank to go through with the deal and warning that he would report him if he refused. At the same time, Ben called, questioning why Frank had left the exchange point. Unfazed, Frank threatened to burn the stolen money if Ben did not come in person to collect it. Klay called once more, but Frank refused to negotiate without knowing who they were dealing with. He insisted that Klay contact Ben again. Meanwhile, the motorcyclist kept following every move, matching Frank's pace whenever he shifted lanes. Suddenly, Jessica called. Frank couldn't answer because of the rider's silent presence nearby. She left a message saying she had found Katie with a man at home and had decided to take Katie with her. Jessica had once allowed Frank to stay with Katie, but after this, she no longer trusted him. After hearing the message, Frank showed his weapon to the motorcyclist as a warning. The rider responded by flashing his motorcycle lights, showing no sign of fear. Feeling uncertain, Frank called Klay again while driving. The motorcyclist stayed close. Klay told Frank to return to Chandler Station, confusing Frank since he never mentioned Chandler as the drop-off point. Klay then hung up, prompting Frank to shout in frustration. Exiting the tunnel, Frank received a threatening message from unknown. They warned that Klay would soon be killed and that Frank would be hunted because the money belonged to their group. Soon after, Ben called again, threatening Frank for disobeying orders. Suddenly, shots rang out, hitting Frank's car window. Frank accelerated to escape as the motorcyclist fired after him. The chase ended when the rider crashed into a parked car and died instantly. Frank reached Klay's place and stormed inside with his rifle. He grabbed Klay, shoved him into the car, and pointed his weapon at Klay's men. As they left, Unknown called to declare that the money belonged to his group, and that both Frank and Klay were marked for death. Their escape was quickly blocked by a car that opened fire. Frank reacted swiftly, reversing to get away. Safe at last, Klay confessed that Ben was not their client but a mafia member. Klay had been paid to sabotage the robbery so Unknown's group would appear weak. He explained that he couldn't meet Ben without the money or he would be killed immediately. With no options left, Frank decided to return the money to Unknown, planning to use his West End mafia connections to smooth the process. He gave Klay a small cut so he could hide for a while. Unexpectedly, Klay pulled a gun and tried to kill Frank. Frank subdued him, but Klay then turned the gun on himself and died. With time running out, Frank asked Klay about Unknown's real group name, but Klay passed away before answering. Frank left his body by the roadside and went to a remote spot to clean the blood from the car. Soon Ben called again, revealing he knew about Frank's family and that Frank was just an ordinary worker doing missions to support them. Hearing this, Frank called Katie and told her to escape with Ryan to their uncle's house. Since Ryan was already home, Frank asked Katie to meet him at a parking garage on Grand Street. He did not explain that this was connected to the mafia. Then Frank called Jessica, asking her to pick up Katie. Jessica was still angry and didn't take the request seriously at first. Only after Frank begged did she agree. Unfortunately, Ben's men arrived shortly after and kidnapped Jessica. Frank stopped the car, stunned by what had just happened. Shortly after, Ben called again, ordering Frank to come to the designated spot and hand over the money in the car. As Frank prepared to obey, Unknown called, and Frank answered immediately. During the call, Unknown demanded their money. Frank explained that his ex-wife had been kidnapped, and he feared Katie might be in danger if he didn't hand the money over to Ben soon. Unknown assured Frank that his family would be safe now because Frank controlled the money. They added that their own family faced threats from the West End Mafia if the money wasn't returned. Both sides found themselves trapped in trouble. Unknown offered to work with Frank to fix the mess caused by Klay. They promised to clear all of Frank's debts to the West End. Finally, Unknown asked Frank to share the drop-off location with Ben so their men could arrive and assist. With no other option, Frank called Ben. Ben was furious that Frank hadn't obeyed earlier and threatened to kill Jessica if Frank tried to play games. Yet Frank remained unshaken. He challenged Ben, knowing he held the power as long as he kept the money. Soon Ben called again, promising not to hurt Jessica if Frank handed over the money immediately. After calming Jessica, Frank gave Ben the drop-off location. He then sent the same location to Unknown, so their men could arrive and take down Ben. On the way, Frank's car was ambushed by Ben's men. Gunfire erupted, but Frank returned fire with his rifle. After neutralizing the attacker, he checked the man's condition. Hearing police sirens nearby, Frank sped away. Once at a safe distance, Frank suspected his location had been tracked. He found a device hidden inside the money bag. Throwing it away, he then drove to a secluded spot. There, he grabbed the money bag and Molotov bombs he had prepared and left the car. Setting the car on fire, he headed to a mall parking lot to meet Katie. When Frank arrived, he worried because Katie wasn't in the car. Soon she appeared, and he pulled her into a hug. After placing the money in the trunk, Frank invited Katie to join him at the drop-off point. During the drive, Frank kept his troubles to himself. Katie noticed her father's jacket was stained with blood but said little. She guessed they were carrying money and worried Frank might go back to prison. Frank quickly reassured her that would not happen but stressed they had to finish this delivery. At the drop-off, Frank gave Katie his wallet and asked her to drive to her uncle's house. Katie hesitated, afraid to leave him alone and unsure if she could drive by herself. Frank believed in her. Before they parted, Frank told Katie to grow up knowing right from wrong and never to defend men who disrespect her. After reminding her how to drive, he headed upstairs to deliver the money. Once her father went inside, Katie gathered courage and started the car. Instead of leaving, she drove upstairs to follow him. She turned off the headlights and found Frank negotiating. Frank demanded that Ben release Jessica from the car. When Ben hesitated, Frank lit a Molotov bomb and moved it near the money bag. Finally, Ben freed Jessica, but Frank threw the bomb at Ben's car and escaped with the money bag. Frank and Jessica separated, knowing Ben was only after Frank. At the same time, Katie briefly stepped out to help her mother, but Ben opened fire. Katie jumped back into the car. Panicked, she stalled the engine but soon calmed down, restarted the car, and rushed downstairs to find her parents. On the lower floor, Katie found Frank, who quickly got into the car. As they drove off, Katie asked about her mother, but Frank told her to focus on driving and assured her that Jessica was safe. Once they left the parking area, Frank took the wheel. His plan was to lure Ben into chasing them toward where Unknown's group was waiting. Frank kept a close eye on the rearview mirror until Ben's group gave chase, sparking a high-speed pursuit through the city. Knowing his car well, Frank skillfully dodged traffic and narrowly avoided a crash from behind. During the chase, Frank's phone rang. Katie answered an incoming call from Unknown. Frank told Unknown to hold on while he baited Ben toward their location. Soon, gunfire erupted from Ben's men. Frank warned Katie to duck as he maneuvered the car through the chaos. They reached the parking area, followed closely by Ben's men. Suddenly, Unknown's team appeared, opening fire on Ben's car until it came to a halt. Ben was dragged out and shot dead on the spot by Unknown's men. Meanwhile, Frank reassured Katie to stay low while he handed over the money. Outside the car, Unknown put away his pistol and took the bag from Frank. Unknown's sole goal was the money, and he allowed Frank to leave unharmed. Frank carefully drove out of the lot, making sure the coast was clear. Once safe, he took Katie to the meeting place with Jessica. On the way, Frank asked how Katie was doing. Katie apologized for not leaving the parking lot as instructed, but Frank was glad she stayed. He admitted that without her, he might not have made it. He even praised her driving skills. When they arrived at the cafe, Frank stayed in the car. Katie ran inside to meet Jessica. The two embraced, relieved after everything they had been through. Frank watched from the car, feeling at last that it was finally over. The end. So the moral of the story is if your job sounds simple but involves stolen money, masked gangsters, ex-wives, and Molotov bombs, Maybe update your resume.